well, you know, what is sacred speech? And what's the difference between sacred speech and ordinary speech, normal speech? To begin to answer that question, because this requires quite a large answer, but to begin to answer this, I can refer right back to what we just said about how I see that India, in traditional Indian culture, is basically devoid of how the Europeans have used this word mysticism. And it gets down to the speech itself. That when we take Panini, for example, we take his text Ashtadhyayi. There is not a superimposition of a philosophy, of a rational kind of thinking, of solely a rational thinking. And by the way, Panini's text was not meant really for people who did not know Sanskrit. In fact, his text was never even really meant for mere students of Sanskrit. To understand Panini's text, one had to have a considerable knowledge of Sanskrit. And the reason for Panini's text, and this is something that I asked myself for years as I struggled with this text. This is my God, this is really a struggle to be able to see where how this whole thing works, where the whole thing goes. Why would he make something of such enormous complexity? Such complexity that even in the West, it has taken academics and mathematicians and linguists until the last 50 or 60 years to really figure out where Panini was going with all this stuff. Why would he do this? Was he trying to impress his peers? Why would he make such a seemingly intense theoretical exercise to define a whole language, or to define speech itself? And the reason that I finally concluded was that there was something much bigger here. That there were the performances of sacred rites for the prosperity of the society, and the sacred rites required enormous precision, as in all magical ritual. So Panini and a whole traditions and lineages of people like him who were thought of as grammarians or metagrammarians disciplined the performance of the Vedic ritual. This is why it was so important for the societies of that time, for the kings and queens of that time, in order to keep their publics happy. Kailash also mentioned in one of his comments, I think in a complimentary sense, that that he didn't see any of this weird magic in what Babaji's talking about in terms of the syllables. He's not making any promises that anybody is going to have a better harvest or get rich quick or anything like that by using these certain syllables. In fact, he said that in a way, Babaji sort of seems scientific in his approach. So we make a distinction. We must make a distinction now between the mystical and the scientific, because there is a distinction here, and the distinction is not one of one being highly rational and the other being irrational. It's not that one is something that is transparent and provable, and the other is something that is unknowable and often flaky. So I thought we would examine some of these elements, and these are very esoteric elements involved in what I would consider mystical kind of thinking as opposed to scientific thinking. I'm not conforming to the usage of mysticism as we have just described in European history, but I'm going in the direction of sacred speech. Sacred speech to us at this point, of course, is just an idea, an ideal. In fact, I would go so far as to say it's a fiction. We want to give some substance to it. We want to give some density to it, so we can start understanding at least its contours, if not something even deeper about it. So I've made what I discovered, I found an old outline that I had made about resemblance. Resemblance is a category that is used extensively in Indian culture and was a category used in European sort of mystical culture, which doesn't conform to the European usage of mysticism, but more the use of hermeticism, alchemy, in the Middle Ages. And curiously enough, it's in the vocabulary of hermeticism, European hermeticism, that I find more similarities with Indian usage of some of these concepts than I find in the modern psychoanalytical terms, which are in common usage today. In fact, I really object to most of these modern psychoanalytical terms. I don't think that they really describe or represent Indian tradition at all. So, I have a couple short things to read to you from the Vedas that are going to set the stage for this discussion, and then I'm going to read to you a passage from my book, Autobiography of a Sadhu. Okay, so, can you see this? This is my old copy of the Purushashukta, which is a very important Vedic Rig. Now this is the Rig 14 in Purushashukta. And the translation is, From the mind of Virat Purusha was born the moon. From his eyes, the sun. From his mouth, Indra and Agni. From his life breath, the wind. From the navel of the Virat Purusha sprang the space between heaven and earth. From his head, the heaven. From his feet, earth. The gods and rishis created the other worlds in this manner. There are literary devices there that are very important for us to understand, especially the analogy. Now, if I can find my book. Oh, here it is. This is something I rarely do, by the way, is do a book reading out of my own book. But this passage that I'm going to read to you was not lightly composed. This was probably one of my 2 or 3 most difficult sections to write, not because I didn't have lots of ideas, but because I had to get lots of ideas down into a very short space, and I had to be very coherent about it. So there is a great deal of density in this passage. Words are not lightly used. I tried to eliminate every word that was unnecessary and sharpen every word to give the greatest clarity possible, because this passage really sums it all up.